The heavy oak doors of the courtroom creaked open as I stepped inside. Every sound seemed magnified. The squeak of my heels against the polished marble floor, the soft rustle of papers, the sharp whispering of curious eyes that followed me. The air was thick, charged with the tension of a trial that had dragged on for weeks. Lawyers in dark suits shuffled through their notes. Reporters leaned forward with pens ready, and the accused sat with an arrogance that made my stomach turn. No one expected me to be here. Not today. Not ever. And yet I was. The moment I entered, silence fell like a blanket. Even the clicking of the stenographer's keys stilled. I could feel every gaze digging into me, trying to place my face, to decide whether I was friend, foe, or ghost. But it wasn't the crowd that made the silence unbearable. It was him. The judge. His gavel froze mid-air, his lips parted, and his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes that had destroyed so many lives, widened with something I had never seen in him before. Fear. Is that her? He whispered, barely audible, but in the stillness, it carried. The murmurs erupted instantly. Lawyers glanced at one another. The accused twisted in his chair, craning his neck to see me better. His face shifted from confusion to alarm. I did not flinch. I held my ground, my chin raised, every ounce of me burning with the control I had built over years of silence. No one here knew the truth. Not the prosecutors, not the defense attorneys, not even the journalists desperate for a scandal. To them, I was just a woman stepping into the middle of a storm. But to the judge, I was the storm. My hands clenched the strap of my leather bag as I walked slowly toward the witness stand. Each step echoed like a drumbeat, a countdown to something none of them could stop. My pulse thudded in my ears, but my face betrayed nothing. I had learned long ago that the most dangerous weapon was silence. The defense attorney, slick hair, smug smile, rose from his chair. Your Honor, who is this woman? The judge said nothing. His fingers gripped the edge of the bench, knuckles white. His eyes refused to leave me. He stammered, but stopped himself. A judge was supposed to be composed, impartial, untouchable. Yet here he was, trembling. As though the very sight of me had cracked his mask, I allowed myself the smallest smile. The accused, a man whose lies had poisoned countless lives, slammed his hand on the table. Answer him, Judge! Who the hell is she? His voice broke the tension. But it didn't release it, it only wound the coil tighter. Finally, the judge exhaled, slow and shaky. His eyes never left mine. She's not supposed to be alive. Gasps filled the room. Papers fell from trembling hands. Reporters scrambled to jot down his words, their pens scratching frantically. Alive, that was the word he chose, because to them, I was gone, buried, forgotten, erased. But I had returned, and I had chosen this courtroom, this very trial, as the stage for my truth. I stepped into the witness box, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. My voice didn't shake. My eyes didn't blink, because the truth was all I had left, and it was sharper than any blade. The judge tried to compose himself, but it was too late. He knew that his past, the lies he had helped weave, the betrayals he had buried under verdicts and signatures, were about to claw their way back into the light, and I would be the one holding the torch. When I sat down, I could feel the entire courtroom leaning forward, desperate to know who I was, what I carried, and why the most powerful man in this room had nearly dropped his gavel at the sight of me. I folded my hands, stared directly at the accused, and whispered just loud enough for the microphone to catch. You thought you buried me, but you buried the wrong woman. The silence that followed was heavier than any words, because this was only the beginning. The courtroom buzzed with whispers after my words. The judge struck his gavel, but his usual commanding presence had vanished. The sound was hollow, like a desperate attempt to cover the truth already bleeding into the room. Reporters craned forward. The defense lawyer glared. The accused stared at me with narrowed eyes, searching his memory, fighting the growing dread that perhaps he did know me. But none of them could know the whole story. Not yet. As the prosecutor cleared his throat and began his questioning, my mind drifted, pulled backward into the years I had tried so hard to bury. The flashback: I was 26 when my world collapsed. A wife, a mother, a woman who believed in justice, in truth, in the system that now sat before me cloaked in robes and authority. Back then, the judge, Judge Harrison, wasn't just a figure in a black robe. He was a family friend. Trusted, respected. He dined at my house, patted my son's head, told me I was like the daughter he never had. And the accused, Daniel Cross, my husband's business partner, Charismatic, silver-tongued, the kind of man people applauded in public while whispering warnings in private. But I was too blind, or perhaps too trusting. It started with whispers, funds missing from accounts, my husband accused of fraud. At first, I laughed. My husband was a good man, devoted, incapable of deceit. But then the evidence appeared. Documents, transactions, signatures, all pointing to him, all pointing away from Daniel. And who presided over the trial? Judge Harrison. I still remember sitting in that very same courtroom years ago, clutching my husband's hand, whispering, "It will be okay. The truth always wins." But the truth had no chance. Not when the judge was already bought. Not when Daniel had planted every piece of evidence. Not when they decided my husband was the perfect scapegoat for their empire of corruption. My husband was sentenced. His eyes found mine as they dragged him away, and in that broken glance, I saw something I could not name then: resignation. A week later, he was gone. They called it suicide in prison. But I knew it was murder, tied neatly with the bow of despair. And as for me, they did not stop at him. Anonymous threats filled my mailbox. Shadows followed me home. And then, the cruelest cut of all, Child Protective Services arrived one morning with papers, signed by the judge himself, declaring me unfit to raise my son, my little boy. My heart beat. My reason. I screamed. I begged. I fell to my knees in the doorway as they carried him out, his small hands reaching for me, tears staining his cheeks. "Mommy, Mommy, don't let them take me." Those words still live in my bones, carved deep into a place that never heals. After that, everything blurred. The threats turned into silence, as if they believed I was broken enough to never rise again. They erased me, declared me unstable, unworthy, invisible. For a while they were right. I disappeared. The present Mrs. Rowe. The prosecutor's voice yanked me back into the courtroom. The name wasn't mine, but it was the one I had worn for years like a cloak of survival. "Yes," I answered calmly, though my throat was tight. "You claim to have evidence regarding this case. Yet until now, no record of your involvement exists. Can you explain why?" I could feel every eye drilling into me, hungry for answers. Even Daniel leaned forward, his arrogance cracking as a bead of sweat rolled down his temple. I took a slow breath, steadying the storm inside me. "Because I was never meant to exist again," I said softly, each word sharp enough to cut. The courtroom stilled. I was erased. I continued. "Be the man sitting on trial today, and by the man presiding over this court." The gasp that followed was like a wave crashing. The judge's face drained of color. He raised his gavel, slammed it, his voice trembling. "Order. RDR toward." But order was gone. Reporters whispered furiously, pens scratching like wildfire. Lawyers jumped to their feet in protest. The accused cursed under his breath. And me, I simply sat there, hands folded, the ghost they thought they buried, finally dragging their sins back into the light, the scar beneath the smile as the chaos swirled. I pressed my lips together in a thin smile. Not of joy, not of triumph, but of memory. Because what they didn't know yet was that I had spent years in the shadows, clawing my way back. I had changed my name, built a new life in the quiet corners of the world where no one could find me. I had studied law in silence, devoured everything about the system that had destroyed me. Every betrayal, every scar, every tear, I had turned them into weapons. And now, seated before them, I was no longer the broken woman sobbing in a doorway as her son was stolen away. I was their reckoning, and this courtroom would be the place where the first cracks in their empire began to shatter. The courtroom was a storm. Shouts from the attorneys, scribbles from the journalists, gasps from the gallery. It all blended into a furious noise that the judge's gavel could no longer command. "Order. ORDR," I sighed. Judge Harrison's voice cracked like glass under pressure. His face, once so calm and commanding, was pale and glistening with sweat, but his trembling hands betrayed him. He knew the tide had shifted, and I was the one pulling the current. The first strike, the prosecutor raised his hand, calling for silence. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we must hear what this witness has to present. The defense can object afterward." The defense attorney sneered, his voice sharp as a blade. "This is outrageous. This woman's identity is unverified. Her testimony could be fabricated." I leaned forward, my voice steady, each word echoing. "Check the archives." All eyes snapped toward me. "If you search your sealed records from 15 years ago, trial 4829, you'll find the transcripts. You'll find my name. You'll find his name." I said, pointing to Daniel Cross, who sat frozen, his lips parted in disbelief. The room erupted again, but this time it wasn't chaos. It was curiosity, shock, hunger for truth. Trial 4829, a reporter muttered. That's the fraud case that ended with. Les, I cut in. The one where my husband took the fall for a crime he never committed. Where the evidence was planted, where Judge Harrison himself presided. The color drained from the judge's face. This is irrelevant. The defense attorney shouted, but his voice shook. I smiled, slow and deliberate, the kind of smile that comes from years of holding back tears until they hardened into steel. On the contrary, it is the most relevant thing in this room. The hidden documents. I opened my leather bag with care, as though handling something fragile. The rustle of paper filled the room as I placed a thick folder on the witness stand. Daniel's eyes widened. He knew what was coming. These are copies, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. The originals are in safe hands. Signed contracts, bank transfers, hidden correspondences between Daniel Cross and Judge Harrison. Proof that the fraud was orchestrated. That my husband was framed. That they split millions while he rotted in prison. Gasps filled the room. Some people even stood from their seats, straining to see. The prosecutor hurried forward to collect the documents, flipping through them with wide eyes. His jaw tightened. Your Honor, this appears authentic. We must verify immediately. Lies, Daniel shouted, his voice breaking. He shot up from his seat, face red with fury. She's making this up. She's a bitter, grieving widow who wants revenge. I tilted my head, watching him unravel. Funny, you recognize me now, don't you? 15 years, Daniel. Did you think I'd stay buried forever? The jury whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between me, Daniel, and the trembling judge. The balance of power had shifted. They could feel it in the air. The judge's cracks. Judge Harrison slammed the gavel, but his voice shook. No! This court won't tolerate the truth. I interrupted, my voice slicing through his protest. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in his career, Judge Harrison was speechless before a courtroom. He tried to meet my eyes, but he couldn't hold the stare. I pressed on, my tone softer now, but sharper than ever. You signed the papers to take my son away. Do you remember that, Judge? You declared me unfit. You destroyed a mother's life to cover your own sins. The crowd gasped again, this time with something heavier. Sympathy. A woman in the gallery dabbed her eyes. The journalist scribbled with renewed fury. Even the prosecutor's stern mask cracked into something human. Judge Harrison's hands trembled so badly the gavel slipped from his grip and clattered onto the bench. The enemy cornered. Daniel's mask of arrogance shattered completely. He leaned forward, spittle flying as he shouted, You don't know what you're talking about! You're nothing! Nothing! I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned into the microphone, my voice calm, lethal. I was nothing because you made me nothing. You stole my husband's life. You stole my son. You erased me, but you forgot one thing. Truth doesn't stay buried. It claws its way back. And now it's here. The courtroom was dead silent. Everyone hanging on my words. Daniel collapsed back into his chair, his chest heaving. For the first time, he looked small, pathetic, like a man staring down the very ghost he had tried to erase. The judge tried to gather himself, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. His voice was barely a whisper. Well, we will take a recess. But the prosecutor rose sharply. No, Your Honor. With all due respect, this court cannot ignore the evidence presented today. Not when it directly implicates both the defendant and potentially. He hesitated, glancing toward the bench, the court itself. The entire room turned toward Judge Harrison. And in that moment, everyone saw it. Not the powerful judge, not the untouchable man behind the robe, but a cornered liar, terrified that his empire of lies was crumbling before his very eyes. The sweet taste of beginning as the bailiff announced the recess anyway. People rose in a frenzy, whispering, pointing, speculating. I stayed seated, calm, composed, because this was only the beginning. I had delivered the first strike, and already they were shaking. But my real weapon, the final blow, was still waiting, and when I revealed it, neither Daniel Cross nor Judge Harrison would ever stand again. The courtroom doors had barely swung shut for recess when the murmurs began. Reporters huddled in frantic clusters, their pens scratching like sparks across paper. The jury whispered to one another, shock rippling in waves across their faces. But Daniel Cross sat hunched, jaw tight, fists trembling. And Judge Harrison. He looked as though the ground beneath him had vanished. His robe, the robe that once commanded fear and respect, now seemed like nothing but cheap cloth draped over a guilty man. I sat still, silent, waiting, because patience had always been my sharpest blade. The return to order. When the recess ended, the air was different. The crowd surged back in with restless energy, no longer there to witness a routine trial but a reckoning. All rise, the bailiff intoned, though his voice cracked as his eyes darted toward the judge. Judge Harrison entered slower than usual, his steps heavy. His gavel came down weakly. Court is in session. He didn't dare look at me. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, the state requests permission to continue questioning the witness and to submit additional evidence for immediate consideration. The judge swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He knew he couldn't refuse without sealing his own fate. Proceed. The truth laid bare. The prosecutor approached me cautiously, as though I carried fire in my hands. Mrs. Rowe, or whatever your true name is, you've alleged a conspiracy between the defendant and this court. Can you state, under oath, who you really are? The room leaned in. Even Daniel's breathing grew shallow, his knuckles white against the table. I rose slowly from my seat. My heart thundered, but my voice was clear, ringing through the chamber, like a bell tolling the end of a long, dark night. My name is Alina Carter. Gasps filled the room. Some of the older lawyers exchanged wide-eyed looks. The name had not been spoken in years, not since it was deliberately buried under lies. I am the widow of Michael Carter, the man wrongfully convicted in Trial 4829, the man who died in prison for a crime he never committed. My throat tightened, but I pressed on. And I am the mother of his son, the boy who was taken from me under Judge Harrison's order. The boy whose future you all destroyed. The courtroom broke into chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes from cameras lit up the chamber. Silence. The judge bellowed, though his voice shook. He pounded his gavel again and again. But each strike sounded weaker, hollower, like a man trying to hold back an avalanche with his bare hands. The final evidence. I reached once more into my leather bag. From its depths I pulled a small black recorder. I kept this, I said softly, holding it high so all could see. The night before my husband's sentencing, Daniel cross-met with Judge Harrison in his chambers. He thought I was gone from the building, but I wasn't. I recorded everything. Daniel shot to his feet, his face twisting in fury. Lies! That doesn't exist. Click. The tape crackled to life, and then, clear as day, their voices filled the courtroom. Daniel's smooth drawl, as long as Michael takes the fall, we're untouchable. The papers are forged, the money trail leads to him. By the time anyone questions it, he'll be long gone. And then Harrison's low growl. His wife suspects something. But don't worry, I'll sign the order, we'll take the boy. No one will believe her once she's alone. The sound of my own gasp followed, captured all those years ago. Before I fled into the shadows, the courtroom erupted. Reporters leapt from their seats. Jurors covered their mouths. Even the bailiff, sworn to silence, muttered, "Oh my God." Daniel lunged toward me, but the guards restrained him as he shouted, "She's lying! That's fake!" It's doctored. But his voice was drowned by the judges. No, no. His gavel clattered from his trembling hand. His face had turned ashen, his body sagging as though the weight of his sins had finally crushed him. The prosecutor's voice rang out like a final verdict. Your Honor, based on this recording and the documents submitted, the state moves for immediate suspension of Judge Harrison and the arrest of Daniel Cross on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The gallery exploded in cheers and gasps. The jury nodded, some even glaring at the bench with open disgust. Judge Harrison whispered something no one could hear. His robe, once a symbol of power, now looked like a costume stripped of its meaning. The bailiff stepped forward. Not toward Daniel this time, but toward the bench. Judge Harrison, I'm afraid you'll need to come with us. The old man's eyes darted around the courtroom, searching for a lifeline, but there was none. At last, his gaze fell on me, pleading, desperate. But I gave him nothing. Only the same silence he had given me when I begged for mercy all those years ago. As they led him away, Daniel thrashed, shouting curses, his voice cracking. This isn't over. She's nothing. She's no shine, G. But the only sound that mattered was the click of handcuffs, tightening around his wrists. The reckoning the courtroom was still buzzing when I finally sat down again. My body trembled, not from fear, but from release. Years of silence had shattered in a single day. For a moment, I closed my eyes. I could almost feel Michael's hand in mine, hear my son's laughter echoing in the distance. Justice did not bring them back. It never could. But it brought me something I had been denied for so long: dignity. And maybe, just maybe, when the world heard the truth, my son, wherever he was, would know that his mother had never stopped fighting for him. I rose slowly, gathered my things, and walked out of the courtroom. The cameras flashed, voices shouted, but I didn't stop. Because revenge, I had learned, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was just the truth finally spoken where lies once ruled. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge of all was simply standing tall, unbroken, in the very place they once tried to bury you.